The night was cruel. The wind cut through the air like a knife, howling through the empty streets, rattling old street signs and slamming against frozen window panes. Most people were home, wrapped in blankets, safe from the bitter cold. But not her. Out there, in the middle of the night, a dog lay curled in the snow. Alone. Abandoned. Freezing. She had been left on the side of the road hours earlier, her thin body already weak from hunger. She had wandered at first, searching for shelter, searching for warmth. But there was none. No door opened for her. No hand reached out. She had walked until her legs could no longer hold her. And then, she collapsed. The snow continued to fall, flurries drifting onto her fragile frame, dusting her fur with white. Her breaths came in soft, uneven puffs of air, each one slower than the last. And then, she stopped shivering. A deadly sign. Because when the body is too cold, it stops trying to fight. Her vision blurred. Her heartbeat slowed. She closed her eyes, the darkness wrapping around her. Was this it? Was this how it all ended? The night carried on, the storm growing stronger. And as the minutes passed, so did her hope. She could not hold on much longer. Then, a light. Far in the distance. Faint at first, but growing brighter. A pair of headlights appeared, cutting through the storm. A car approached, its tires crunching over the frozen pavement, slowing as it neared the lifeless figure in the snow. Inside the car, a woman sat gripping the steering wheel. She had not meant to stop. She had been driving home, thinking of nothing but the warmth of her bed, the relief of stepping inside, away from the cold. But something in her gut told her to look again. To see what was lying just beyond the edge of the road. And when she did, her heart clenched. It was a dog. Still. Barely visible beneath the falling snow. And worst of all, not moving. A sharp chill ran through her, not from the cold, but from the realization that this was a life hanging in the balance. She hesitated. What if it was already too late? What if she was too late? But then, the smallest movement. A tiny, weak breath. The faintest sign of life. Her hesitation vanished. She acted. The car door flew open. A rush of freezing air hit her, but she barely noticed. All she could see was the fragile body in the snow. She ran forward, her boots crunching against the ice, her breath visible in the cold air. Kneeling down, she reached out with trembling hands. "Oh my God!" she whispered. The dog's fur was soaked. Frozen stiff. Her body was like ice. She was still breathing, but barely. The woman's throat tightened. "You're not dying tonight," she murmured, wrapping her arms around the tiny body. The dog let out the weakest whimper, too exhausted to resist, too frozen to move. She wasn't scared. She wasn't fighting. She had already given up. But the woman hadn't. She lifted the frail dog into her arms and ran back to her car, her mind racing. The second she shut the car door, she turned the heat all the way up. She laid the dog on the passenger seat, wrapping her in her own coat. "Come on, sweet girl. Stay with me." The dog barely reacted. Her body was so cold, so still, she looked as if she were already slipping away. The woman's hands shook as she placed them gently on the dog's chest. She could feel the faintest heartbeat. A fragile rhythm. Slow. Unsteady. The dog's breath came out in soft, uneven puffs. She was running out of time. The woman didn't think. She acted. Throwing the car into gear, she sped down the road, her tires skidding slightly on the ice. She didn't know if there was still time to save her. But she was going to try. She was going to fight for her. Because this dog deserved to live. And someone had to care. As she drove, her heart pounded. She glanced at the dog every few seconds, watching for any sign at all, that she was holding on. And as she drove, a thought settled in her mind. How many more were out there? How many other dogs had been abandoned in the cold, left to die alone? How many people had driven past this one? Too busy, too distracted, too unwilling to stop. She wasn't a vet. She wasn't a rescuer. She wasn't anyone special. But she had chosen to stop. And in that moment, that had made all the difference. The dog was still breathing. Still fighting. And now, she had a chance. Because one person had decided to care. This was just the beginning. The battle wasn't over. The dog wasn't safe yet. Would she make it? Would she recover? Or was this rescue already too late? And if she survived, what would become of her? Would she ever learn to trust again? Would she ever know warmth, love, and kindness? Or would she always carry the scars of that cold, lonely night? Stay with me. Because what happens next will restore your faith in kindness. The car sped through the quiet streets, the tires slicing through the ice-covered roads. Inside, the woman's hands gripped the steering wheel, her fingers still shaking from the cold, and from the weight of what she had just done. Beside her, wrapped in her thick winter coat, lay the shivering dog. She had adjusted the heat to its highest setting, directing the warm air toward the fragile creature. The dog's breathing was uneven, her body limp, her fur still damp with melting snow. The woman stole quick glances at her, her heart pounding with fear. "Stay with me, girl," she murmured. There was no response. The dog didn't move, didn't whimper, didn't lift her head. She was still here, still breathing, but barely. The woman pressed harder on the gas. There was no time to lose. The vet clinic was one of the only places still open this late. When she pulled up, the parking lot was nearly empty, the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the pavement. The moment she opened the car door, a gust of freezing wind hit her. She didn't care. She scooped up the dog, holding her close to her chest, shielding her from the bitter cold. Her boots crunched against the frozen ground as she rushed inside. The bell above the door jingled. A receptionist looked up in shock. "I found her in the snow," the woman gasped. "She's freezing. I don't know how long she was out there." The receptionist's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the lifeless-looking dog. Before she could respond, a vet tech burst through the doors. "Bring her back." The woman followed, her pulse racing. She had done all she could. Now, it was up to them. The exam room was a flurry of movement. The vet and his team worked fast, checking the dog's vitals, warming her with heated blankets, hooking her up to 4 fluids. The woman stood frozen near the door, watching in helpless silence. The vet's expression was grim. "She's hypothermic," he said. "Her body temperature is dangerously low. If she had been out there any longer..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The woman swallowed the lump in her throat. "Will she make it?" The vet didn't answer right away. "We're doing everything we can." She knew what that meant. It meant they didn't know. It meant it could go either way. It meant all she could do now was wait. The woman stayed at the clinic. She couldn't leave. Not yet. She sat in the waiting area, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Time moved painfully slow. Every time the door to the exam room opened, her heart stopped. She kept expecting to hear the word she feared most. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." But those words never came. Hours passed. Then, finally, the vet walked toward her. And this time, his face held something different. "Hope. She made it through the worst of it," he said. "She's still weak, but she's fighting." The woman let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "She's alive." The vet nodded. "Yes. And she has you to thank for that." The dog, they started calling her Winter, was not out of danger yet. But she was alive. And that was enough. For the first few days, she barely moved. She was exhausted, her body still healing, still warming up. The woman visited every day. At first, Winter barely acknowledged her. She would stare blankly at the wall, her ears flat, her body tense. She didn't trust humans. Not yet. But the woman was patient. She sat beside her. She spoke softly. And slowly, Winter began to respond. A flick of her ear. A tiny movement of her tail. And then, one day, she lifted her head when the woman entered the room. A small thing. A simple thing. But it meant everything. Weeks passed. Winter grew stronger. Her fur became shinier. Her body filled out, no longer just skin and bones. And slowly, she began to trust. The first time she wagged her tail, the woman almost cried. The first time she took a treat from her hand, it felt like a victory. The first time she leaned into a touch instead of pulling away. It was like watching a broken heart begin to heal. Winter was learning that she was safe now. That she was wanted. That she was loved. One day, the vet finally said the words the woman had been waiting for. "She's ready to go home." The woman's heart leaped. "Home?" The vet smiled. "With you." And that was how it happened. How Winter became more than a stray. More than a survivor. She became family. The woman took her home, setting up a warm bed, a safe space, food, and toys. For the first time, Winter had a home of her own. She learned how to play, how to trust, how to be happy, and most of all, she learned how to love. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow across the frost-covered grass. Inside the house, warmth radiated through the small living room. A fireplace crackled softly, filling the space with a gentle light. And lying curled up on a soft bed, surrounded by warmth, safety, and love, was Winter. The dog who had once lain freezing in the snow, forgotten by the world, barely clinging to life. Now, she was safe. Now, she had a home. The woman sat beside her, watching as Winter stretched lazily, her tail giving a slow, contented wag. A sight that just weeks ago seemed impossible. "You like it here, don't you?" the woman whispered. Winter lifted her head, looking up at her with soft, trusting eyes. She didn't flinch anymore. She didn't cower. She knew she was safe. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. The woman often thought about that night. The moment she almost didn't stop. The moment she saw something in the snow, thought for just a second, and then chose to act. What if she hadn't? What if she had ignored that voice in her gut? What if she had convinced herself that someone else would help? Would Winter still be out there? Would she have survived? Or would she have become just another silent tragedy? One more soul lost to the cold? The thought made the woman's chest tighten. One choice. One moment. It had made all the difference. And the truth was, we all have those moments. We all have times when we see something wrong, something unfair, something that needs fixing. And in those moments, we face a decision. Do we act? Or do we keep walking? That night, the woman had acted. And because of that, Winter had a future. Winter's recovery had been slow. At first, she was still afraid. She had spent so long fighting for survival, always watching her back, never knowing who to trust. But here, in this home, in this warmth, in this love, she was learning. She learned that hands could be gentle. That voices could be kind. That she would never go hungry again. And one morning, as the woman sat drinking coffee, something miraculous happened. Winter trotted toward her, stopped for a second, then wagged her tail. A slow, hesitant wag. Like she was testing the waters of joy. The woman's eyes filled with tears. That's my girl. Because that single, small movement, it meant everything. Winter was no longer just a dog who survived. She was a dog who thrived. She no longer flinched at sudden movements. She no longer cowered at the sound of footsteps. Instead, she leaned into touch. She came when called. She wagged her tail freely, excitedly, like a dog who finally understood what happiness felt like. The woman had once thought she was rescuing Winter. But the truth was, Winter had rescued her, too. Because in saving her, she had learned something powerful. One act of kindness can change a life. One decision, one choice, can mean the difference between life and death. Between despair and hope. Between giving up and believing again. Winter had found her second chance. And the woman? She had found something too. A reminder that the world is still full of goodness. That kindness still exists. And that sometimes, saving a life is the greatest gift you can give yourself. One cold morning, months later, the woman and Winter walked through the park. It was early, the air crisp, the ground covered in a light layer of frost. Winter trotted beside her, strong, healthy, full of life. She was unrecognizable from the dog who had once lain half frozen in the snow. She had survived. She had won. And as they walked, the woman thought back to that night. She thought about how she almost kept driving. How she almost ignored that voice in her gut. And she knew. One choice had changed everything. One decision had saved a life. And that life now had a future. Then, something caught Winter's attention. She stopped, ears perking, nose twitching. The woman followed her gaze, and her heart stopped. There, just a few feet away, huddled in the cold, was another dog. Small, thin, alone. A sight she knew all too well. The woman knelt, her voice soft. "Hey there, sweet one." Winter stepped forward, wagging her tail, as if she understood. As if she remembered. And just like that night, months ago, the woman faced a choice. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She had already learned what one choice could do. She had already seen what kindness could create. So she held out her hand. And whispered, "You're safe now." And just like that, a new story began. Winter had been left for dead. Someone had decided she wasn't worth saving. But that night, one person stopped. One person chose to see her. One person chose to act. And because of that, she lived. How many more are still waiting? How many more are out there right now, alone in the cold? What if the next one depends on you? What if the only thing standing between life and death is whether you decide to stop? Because sometimes, all it takes is one person, one choice, one act of kindness. And that can change everything. If this story moved you, share it. More people need to know that they can make a difference. Like, comment, subscribe. Because somewhere, right now, another dog is waiting. Waiting for someone to care. Waiting for someone to stop. Be the one who does. Because you never know. You might just save a life.